She hid behind the parlor door and heard her own family laughing. They called her worthless. They called her a problem they were finally getting rid of. Then they toasted goodbye to the daughter nobody wanted. But the stranger they sold her to? He wasn't desperate. He was watching. Waiting. And he knew exactly what they'd just thrown away. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Walter Grayson never handled the mail himself. That was work for servants. But when his foreman handed him the thick envelope with the Mercer Ranch seal pressed into dark wax, something made him tear it open right there in the stable yard. He read it once, then again. Then he walked straight into the house without saying a word to anyone, his boots tracking mud across the floor his wife had just had cleaned. Walter. Caroline Grayson looked up from her embroidery, irritation flashing across her carefully maintained features. Your boots. Get the girls. All three of them. Now. The tone stopped her mid-sentence. She set down her needlework and went upstairs without another word. 10 minutes later, the entire Grayson family stood in the main sitting room. Margaret, the eldest daughter, smoothed her silk dress and arranged herself on the settee with practiced grace. 19 years old and already engaged to a railroad executive's son. She carried herself like she'd been born wearing a crown. Sarah, 17 and just as polished, took the chair by the window, afternoon light catching the blonde curls she'd spent an hour setting that morning. Evelyn stood by the bookshelf. She hadn't bothered changing out of her work clothes, plain cotton dress, scuff boots, hair pulled back in a braid that was coming loose. There was mud on her hands from helping old Thomas fix the fence behind the kettle pan. She'd washed most of it off, but her fingernails were still dirty. Margaret wrinkled her nose. Really, Evelyn? Father calls a family meeting and you show up looking like a ranch hand. I'm a ranch hand, Evelyn said flatly. You're a Grayson, Caroline snapped. Act like it. Walter cleared his throat. He was still holding the letter, and his hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from excitement. I've received a proposal. Margaret sat up straighter. Sarah gasped and pressed her hands to her cheeks. Caroline's eyes went wide. A proposal? Margaret breathed. For me? But I'm already engaged too. Not for you, Walter said. He looked down at the letter again, a smile starting to spread across his face. The kind of smile that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. It's from Caleb Mercer. Silence. The Caleb Mercer. Caroline's voice had gone very quiet. The mountain rancher. The same. Even Evelyn had heard of Caleb Mercer. Everyone in the territory had. He owned half the mountain range north of Red Hollow. Thousands of acres of prime grazing land, timber forests, water rights that made him richer than most valley ranchers combined. He was somewhere in his 30s, never married, and lived up in his fortress of a ranch like some kind of wilderness king. People told stories about him, how he'd fought off cattle rustlers single-handedly, how he'd survived 3 winters snowed in without losing a single head of livestock, how he'd turned down marriage proposals from women across 2 territories because none of them met his standards. And now he wanted to marry a Grayson daughter. Margaret's face had transformed into something radiant. Father, I'm honored truly. But William and I have already. He's not asking for you, Margaret. She blinked. Sarah, then? No. Sarah looked confused. But father, there are only 3 of us. He wants Evelyn. The words landed like a stone in still water. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Caroline started laughing. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was high and sharp and disbelieving, the kind of laugh that cuts. Evelyn. She turned to look at her middle daughter, her expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been relief. He wants Evelyn. Walter was reading from the letter now, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when conducting business. Mr. Mercer writes that he's been aware of our family for some time. He's made his choice carefully. He specifically requests Evelyn's hand in marriage and is prepared to offer a substantial bride price. How substantial? Caroline interrupted. Walter named a figure that made both Margaret and Sarah gasp. Evelyn just stood there, her back pressed against the bookshelf, her dirty hands clenched at her sides. She felt like she was watching this happen to someone else, like she'd stepped outside her own body and was observing from a great distance. That's more than William's family offered for Margaret, Sarah said slowly. 3 times more, Walter confirmed. He was grinning now, open and wolfish. The man must be desperate. Caroline had stopped laughing, but her eyes were bright with something cruel. Well. How perfectly convenient. Convenient? Margaret looked between her parents. Mother, what do you mean? But Caroline wasn't listening to Margaret anymore. She was looking at Evelyn, really looking at her for the first time in months, and her smile was cold. When do you leave? Evelyn's voice came out rougher than she intended. Don't I get a say in this? I say. Walter folded the letter and tucked it into his vest pocket. Evelyn. The man is offering enough money to expand our operations into the Eastern Valley. Do you have any idea what that means? This family's influence would triple. So I'm for sale. You're being dramatic, Caroline said sharply. This is how marriage works, dear. Your father and I were arranged. Margaret and William were introduced by their families. This is no different. Except Margaret loves William. Margaret knows her duty, Caroline corrected. Which is more than I can say for you most days. The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Sarah studied her hands. Walter was already moving toward his study, probably to draft a response accepting the proposal. When? Evelyn asked again. Her voice was flat now, empty. When do I leave? 2 weeks, Walter called over his shoulder. Mercer wants the wedding before the first snow. His men will come to escort you up the mountain. Then he was gone. Caroline followed him, probably to start planning how to spend the bride price. Margaret stood, smoothed her dress again, and paused beside Evelyn on her way out. I'm sorry, she said quietly. But father's right. It's good for the family. Good for the family, Evelyn repeated. Margaret couldn't meet her eyes. You'll be fine. I'm sure Mr. Mercer is. He must be a reasonable man. She left. Sarah lingered a moment longer, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then thought better of it and followed her sister. Evelyn stood alone in the sitting room as the sun moved across the floor and the shadows lengthened. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that crying in the Grayson house was just giving people ammunition. Instead, she walked outside, past the manicured gardens her mother was so proud of, past the stables where the thoroughbreds Margaret liked to ride were kept, all the way to the back fence where the cattle grazed. Old Thomas was still there hammering posts into the hard ground. He looked up when she approached, took one look at her face, and set down his hammer. Bad news. Evelyn sat on the fence rail. I'm getting married. Thomas raised his eyebrows. Congratulations. To a stranger. In 2 weeks. Oh. He picked up his hammer again, but he didn't swing it. Anyone I know? Caleb Mercer. The hammer slid from Thomas's fingers and landed in the dirt. "Christ Almighty," he breathed. Then he caught himself and looked at her sharply. "He asked for you specifically." "Apparently." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he bent down, retrieved his hammer, and went back to work. But his movements were slower now. Thoughtful. "That's interesting," he said finally. "Interesting. The man's probably insane or blind or both. Caleb Mercer's a lot of things, but he ain't insane." Thomas drove a nail home with 3 solid strikes. "Known him since he was a boy. His father and I used to trade horses before the old man passed. Caleb took over the ranch when he was barely 20. Turned it into something bigger than his daddy ever dreamed. So he's ruthless. He's smart and careful. Doesn't make decisions without thinking them through." Thomas paused, leaning on the fence post. "If he asked for you specific, he had a reason." "What reason?" "He's never even met me." "You sure about that?" Evelyn frowned. "I think I remember meeting the legendary Caleb Mercer." "Maybe you weren't paying attention to who was watching." Thomas went back to his hammering. "Either way, girl, I'll tell you this. You could do a hell of a lot worse than Caleb Mercer. Worse than being sold off like livestock. Worse than staying here," Thomas said quietly. The words hit harder than Evelyn expected. She looked back toward the house, saw her mother through the window, probably already writing letters to their social circle about the advantageous marriage arrangement, Margaret likely trying on dresses to see which would look best at Evelyn's wedding, her father counting money he didn't have yet. "Yeah," she said finally. "I guess you're right about that." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bedroom, the smallest of the 3 daughters' rooms, the one with the window that stuck and the door that didn't quite close right, and stared at the ceiling. Downstairs, she could hear voices. Her parents were still up talking in the study. She shouldn't eavesdrop. She knew that. But something made her get out of bed, pull on her robe, and creep to the top of the stairs. "Absolute stroke of luck," her father was saying, his voice carrying easily in the quiet house. "I thought we'd be stuck with her until we died." Evelyn froze. "Walter, honestly." Caroline's laugh was soft, conspiratorial. "The poor man has no idea what he's asking for. His funeral or wedding, I suppose. Same thing in this case." They both laughed at that. Evelyn's hand gripped the banister hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Do you think we should warn him?" Caroline asked. "About her temperament? Risk him changing his mind?" "Absolutely not. Once she's up that mountain, she's his problem. The stubborn streak alone, not to mention the way she argues with everyone, the inappropriate friendships with the help. That business last month when she embarrassed Councilman Porter in front of half the town. Don't remind me. I'm still getting looks at church." "Well, Mercer can deal with all of that now. I just hope he doesn't send her back." "He won't," Walter said confidently. "Pride won't let him. A man like that asking for a specific bride, he'd rather suffer through than admit he made a mistake." More laughter. The clink of glasses. They were toasting. Toasting getting rid of her. Evelyn turned and walked back to her room very slowly, very carefully, like she was made of glass that might shatter. She closed the door, sat on the bed, stared at the wall. She'd always known her family didn't understand her, that they were embarrassed by the way she spoke her mind, the way she couldn't just smile and nod when people said things that were wrong, the way she'd rather fix a fence than practice piano, rather read legal documents than romance novels, rather defend old Thomas when Councilman Potter tried to cheat him out of wages than keep quiet and preserve the family's social standing. But she told herself they still love her deep down in their own way. Now she knew better. They were celebrating. Actually celebrating that a stranger was taking her off their hands. Something inside Evelyn's chest cracked open. Not breaking. Reshaping. She stood up and walked to her small closet, opened it. Looked at the two good dresses her mother had insisted she own, both of which she hated, the simple work clothes she actually wore, the coat her father had bought her 3 Christmases ago that was already getting too small because no one had noticed she'd grown. 2 weeks, her father had said. 2 weeks until she left this house forever. 2 weeks until she became Kayla Mercer's problem. Evelyn pulled out her oldest work dress, the one with the patched elbow and the hem she'd let out herself. She laid it on the bed and smoothed it flat. If they wanted to be rid of her so badly, fine. She'd go. She'd marry this mountain man who was apparently fool enough to want her. But she wasn't going to pretend to be something she wasn't. She wasn't going to show up in silk and pearls and play the delicate bride. She wasn't going to lie about who she was just to make this easier for everyone. If Caleb Mercer wanted Evelyn Grayson, he was going to get the real one, the stubborn one, the inappropriate one, the one who embarrassed her family and argued with councilmen and fixed fences with dirty hands. And if that made him regret his proposal? Good. She was done caring what people thought they wanted from her. For the first time in hours, Evelyn smiled. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange blur. Her mother threw herself into wedding preparations with the kind of energy she usually reserved for Margaret's social events. She ordered a white silk dress with lace overlay, completely impractical and nothing Evelyn would have chosen. She planned a small ceremony at the local church, invited exactly enough people to be respectable but not so many that anyone might look too closely at the bride's lack of enthusiasm. Evelyn wasn't consulted about any of it. She spent her days helping Thomas with the ranch work, much to her mother's fury. She came to meals with dirt under her nails and hay in her hair. She refused to practice her penmanship or her posture or her pleasant conversation skills. "You're going to embarrass us right up until the moment you leave, aren't you?" Caroline asked one evening, her voice tight with anger. "I'm just being myself," Evelyn said. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Margaret tried in her way to be kind. She invited Evelyn to her room one night, tried to teach her how to arrange her hair in a more flattering style, how to smile in a way that seemed demure instead of challenging. "When you meet Mr. Mercer," Margaret said, carefully pinning Evelyn's hair, "you should let him lead the conversation. Men like to feel in control. What if he's wrong about something? Then you smile and change the subject." "That sounds exhausting." Margaret's hands stilled. "Marriage is exhausting, Evelyn. But it's our duty. Is that what William tells you?" "William is wonderful," Margaret said, but her voice had gone flat. "We're going to be very happy." Evelyn looked at her sister in the mirror, really looked at her. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Are you happy now?" Evelyn asked quietly. Margaret didn't answer for a long time. Then she pulled the last pin from Evelyn's hair and let it fall. "It doesn't matter if I am," she said finally. "This is what we do. This is who we are. Not me." "No," Margaret agreed softly. "Not you." She left. Evelyn sat at the vanity, hair loose around her shoulders, staring at her own reflection and wondering who would be looking back at her in 2 weeks' time. On the last day, Walter called Evelyn into his study. She'd been in this room exactly 3 times in her life, once when she was 7 and had tracked mud through the house, once when she was 12 and had been caught teaching the stable boy to read, once when she was 15 and had publicly called out Councilman Porter for underpaying his workers. Each time had ended with a lecture about propriety and family reputation. This time, Walter didn't lecture. He sat behind his desk, hands folded, and studied her like a horse he was considering selling. "The men from Mercer Ranch will be here tomorrow morning," he said. "They'll escort you north. The journey takes 3 days." "I know. You'll be married as soon as you arrive. Mr. Mercer wants the ceremony done before the weather turns." "I know." Walter's jaw tightened. "Are you going to fight me on this, Evelyn? Because if you are, I should tell you now." "I'm not fighting," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm going." She paused. "Isn't that what you want?" He blinked, clearly surprised. "I want you to understand this is an incredible opportunity. Most women would be grateful. I'm not most women." "No," Walter agreed. "You're certainly not." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Evelyn could hear the ranch hands bringing the horses in for the evening, normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the kind she wouldn't hear after tomorrow. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Walter asked finally. "Before you go." Evelyn looked at her father, at the man who'd heard her defend old Thomas against corruption and been embarrassed instead of proud. The man who'd heard she was being sold off to a stranger and started counting his money. "No," she said. "There's nothing." She stood and walked to the door. "Evelyn." She paused but didn't turn around. "Try not to disappoint him," Walter said. "This family's reputation depends on it." Evelyn's hand tightened on the doorknob. "I'll do my best." She left before he could see her face. That night, Caroline insisted they have a family dinner. "One last evening together," she said, as if Evelyn were dying instead of just leaving. The cook prepared roasted chicken and potatoes. Margaret wore her second-best dress. Sarah actually brushed her hair. Walter sat at the head of the table like a king surveying his domain. Evelyn wore her work clothes. No one commented. They'd given up by now. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone. Margaret talked about William's family estate. Sarah discussed a new riding horse their father was buying. Caroline mentioned a social event next month that Evelyn wouldn't be attending. No one asked Evelyn about the wedding. No one asked if she was nervous or excited or terrified. No one asked what she thought about marrying a man she'd never met and moving to a ranch 3 days away. No one asked because no one cared. Halfway through the meal, Evelyn set down her fork. "I need to say something." The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at her. "I know what you think of me," she said, her voice steady, calm. "I've always known. I'm not stupid." "Evelyn," Caroline started. "I know I embarrass you. I know you think I'm difficult and stubborn and inappropriate. I know you're relieved I'm leaving." Silence. Margaret stared at her plate. Sarah's face had gone red. Walter's expression was carefully blank. "But I want you to know something." Evelyn looked at each of them in turn. "When I leave tomorrow, I'm not going because you want me to. I'm going because there's nothing for me here. There never was." "That's not fair," Margaret said quietly. "Isn't it?" Evelyn turned to her sister. "When was the last time anyone in this family asked what I wanted, what I thought, what I dreamed about?" No one answered. "That's what I thought." Evelyn stood. "Thank you for dinner. It was lovely." She walked out. Behind her, she heard Caroline's voice, sharp and angry. "Walter, Are you going to just let her? She'll be someone else's problem tomorrow, Walter said wearily. Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room for the last time. She didn't pack much, one bag with her work clothes, her books, her mother's old pocket watch that she'd claimed as a child and Caroline had never bothered to take back. Everything else, the silk dresses, the jewelry, the useless decorative things, she left. She sat on her bed and watched the moon rise through her stuck window. Tomorrow she would leave this house, this family, this life. Tomorrow she would ride north into the mountains with strangers to marry a man who apparently thought he wanted her. He had no idea what he was getting. And despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the bone-deep exhaustion of being unwanted for so long, Evelyn felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe Caleb Mercer would be terrible. Maybe he'd be worse than her family. Maybe this would be the biggest mistake of her life. But maybe, just maybe, he'd meant what he wrote in that letter. Maybe he actually wanted her. Not a Grayson daughter, not a pretty face or a social connection or someone to show off at parties. Her. And if he did, if this mountain stranger actually saw something in her worth wanting, then her family was right to celebrate getting rid of her, because she was going to become something they couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't diminish. She was going to become free. The sun rose cold and clear. Evelyn woke before dawn, dressed in her plainest work dress and sturdiest boots. She braided her hair herself, tight and practical. She looked in the mirror one last time and barely recognized the person looking back. Not because she'd changed, but because for the first time in her life, she looked exactly like herself. Downstairs, she could hear movement, voices, horses in the yard. The Mercer men had arrived. Evelyn picked up her bag and walked downstairs. The family was gathered in the front hall, Caroline in her dressing gown, hair still in curl papers, Walter already dressed, checking his pocket watch, Margaret and Sarah standing together whispering. They all looked up when Evelyn appeared. Caroline's face went pale. You can't wear that. It's what I'm comfortable in. Evelyn, there are men from the Mercer ranch waiting outside. Important men. You're representing this family. No, Evelyn said quietly. I'm not. Not anymore. She walked past her mother, past her sisters, past her father standing in the doorway. Outside, 3 men sat on horses. They were rough-looking, weathered by mountain winters and hard work, the kind of men who knew how to survive in the wilderness. The kind who looked at Evelyn's work dress and dirt scuff boots and didn't even blink. The oldest one, grey-haired, scarred across one cheek, tipped his hat. Miss Grayson. That's me. I'm James. This is Tom and Charlie. We're here to escort you to Mercer Ranch. I'm ready. James gestured to a 4th horse, already saddled. Whenever you are, ma'am. Evelyn turned back one last time. Her family stood in the doorway. Margaret had tears in her eyes. Sarah was biting her lip. Caroline looked furious. Walter looked relieved. None of them said goodbye. Evelyn swung up into the saddle like she'd been doing it her whole life, because she had. She settled her bag behind her and gathered the reins. Let's go. They rode north toward the mountains, toward a future no one could have predicted. Behind them, the Grayson family watched until the riders disappeared over the first hill. Then Walter closed the door, and that was that. 3 days through autumn cold and mountain passes. 3 days of riding through country that got rougher with every mile. 3 days of sleeping on hard ground under stars so bright they looked like ice chips scattered across black velvet. James and his men treated Evelyn with careful respect. They offered to carry her bag. She refused. They tried to give her the warmest spot by the fire. She told them to stop being ridiculous and share equally. By the second day, they stopped treating her like fragile cargo and started treating her like one of them. "You write well," Tom commented on the evening of the second day. "I grew up on a ranch." "Rich ranch," Charlie added. "We heard the Grayson place was fancy." "Fancy doesn't mean much when you're out fixing fence posts." James chuckled. "Mr. Mercer said you weren't like the others." Evelyn looked up sharply. "He said that." "Said you were different." "Said that's why he asked for you." "Different how?" James just smiled and went back to checking the horses. They reached Mercer Ranch on the third afternoon. Evelyn saw it from miles away, a massive compound built into the side of the mountain, protected on three sides by rock face, and on the fourth by a cleared field that gave a perfect view of anyone approaching. The main house was timber and stone, built to withstand anything the mountains could throw at it. Barns and outbuildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen. It was impressive in a way that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with survival. As they rode closer, Evelyn could see people working, ranch hands mending fences, women tending gardens, children running errands. Everyone moved with purpose. No one was idle. "It's bigger than I expected," she said. "Wait till you see the inside," Tom said. "Mr. Mercer don't do nothing halfway." They rode through the main gate. Workers looked up, some nodding to James and his men, others staring openly at Evelyn. She could feel them assessing her, judging. Let them look, she thought. Let them see exactly who they're getting. James led them to the main house and dismounted. "Wait here. I'll tell Mr. Mercer you've arrived." He disappeared inside. Evelyn sat on her horse, very still, very calm. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was it. No going back now. The door opened. A man stepped out. Evelyn had tried to imagine what Caleb Mercer would look like, tried to picture the legendary mountain rancher, the man who'd built an empire in the wilderness, the stranger who'd asked for her hand without ever meeting her. She'd imagined someone older, harder, colder. The man walking toward her was none of those things. He was tall, taller than her father, taller than anyone she'd ever met, broad-shouldered from years of physical work, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that looked like it had been carved from the mountain stone itself. He had scars, one across his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline, and his hands were callous and rough, but his eyes were kind. He stopped a few feet from her horse and looked up at her. Looked at her like he was seeing something no one else had ever bothered to notice. "Evelyn Grayson," he said. His voice was deep, quiet. "Welcome home." Evelyn didn't move from the saddle. She sat there staring down at Caleb Mercer, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. "Home," she repeated. The word felt strange in her mouth. "If you want it to be." He stepped back and gestured toward the house. "You've had a long ride. Come inside. We can talk." She dismounted without his help, landing hard enough that her boots kicked up dust. Tom reached for her bag, but she grabbed it first. "I've got it." Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "James, see to the horses. Make sure they're fed and watered." "Yes, sir." Evelyn followed Caleb toward the house, acutely aware of all the eyes on her, a woman hanging laundry, two men repairing a wagon wheel, a girl no more than 10 carrying a bucket of water. They all stopped to watch. Inside, the house was nothing like her father's estate. No fancy wallpaper or imported furniture. Everything was wood, rough-hewn beams overhead, plank floors worn smooth by years of use, but it was clean, solid, the kind of place built to last through anything. Caleb led her to a large room that looked like it served as both kitchen and gathering space. A fire burned in a massive stone hearth. The table was cut oak, big enough to seat 20. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, not decorative volumes chosen to look impressive, but actual books with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. "Sit," Caleb said, pulling out a chair. "Are you hungry?" "I'm fine. You just rode 3 days. You're hungry." He moved to the stove without waiting for her answer, and Evelyn found herself sitting at a table watching this man who was supposed to be her husband ladle soup into a bowl. He set it in front of her along with bread that looked fresh, then poured coffee, black, strong, the kind ranch hands drank at dawn. "Eat," he said, sitting across from her. "Then we'll talk." Evelyn picked up the spoon. The soup was good, venison and vegetables seasoned with herbs she didn't recognize. She ate slowly, deliberately, refusing to let him see how hungry she actually was. Caleb watched her, not in the way men sometimes watch women, assessing, judging, comparing. He just looked at her like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, Evelyn set down her spoon. "Why me?" "Direct. I like that. I don't care what you like. I want to know why you asked for me specifically. You've never met me. You don't know anything about me except what my father told you in letters, and I guarantee he lied about half of it." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "Your father didn't tell me much at all. Just confirmed you were unmarried and of age." "Then how?" "I've seen you before." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "When?" 3 years ago. I was in Red Hollow selling horses. There was a scene in the town square, a merchant trying to cheat an old man out of wages. Everyone was standing around watching, doing nothing. The memory hit her like cold water. She remembered that day. Councilman Potter's brother-in-law, claiming old Samuel hadn't completed work that everyone knew he had. Samuel standing there with his head in his hands, too scared to argue. "You step in," Caleb continued. "Told the merchant exactly what he was and exactly what you thought of men who stole from people who couldn't fight back. You made him pay Samuel in front of everyone. He called me hysterical. He called you worse than that. But you didn't back down. You stood there until he counted out every coin he owed." Evelyn looked down at her hands. "My mother didn't speak to me for a week after that. Say I embarrassed the family. I thought you were magnificent." Her head snapped up. Caleb's expression hadn't changed, still calm, still watching her with those dark eyes. But there was something in his voice that made her chest feel tight. "You thought I was crazy?" "No. I thought you were brave." He paused. "I asked around about you after that. Found out you were Walter Grayson's daughter. Found out you had a reputation for speaking your mind and defending people who couldn't defend themselves. Found out your family thought you were difficult." "I am difficult." "Good." The word hung between them. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "You don't mean that. Nobody wants difficult." "I do." Caleb leaned forward, forearms on the table. "I've met plenty of beautiful women. Quiet women. Obedient women who smile and nod and never say what they actually think. I could have married any one of them." He held her gaze. "I didn't want any of them. I wanted you." "Why?" "Because up here in these mountains, pretty manners don't mean survival. Survival means telling the truth even when it's hard. It means standing up for what's right even when everyone else is standing down." It means having the courage to be exactly who you are. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at his ranch. I need a partner, Evelyn. Not a decoration. Not someone who will smile and keep quiet while the world goes to hell. I need someone strong enough to build something that lasts. Evelyn's throat felt tight. You don't know me. Not really. I could be. You could be exactly who you've always been. He turned back to her. And that's all I'm asking for. She didn't know what to say to that. For 3 years, her family had told her everything she was wrong. And now this stranger, this mountain rancher who barely knew her, was saying it was exactly right. I should warn you, she said finally. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. I'm not going to smile when I'm angry or keep quiet when something's wrong. I'm not going to be easy to live with. Good thing I'm not easy to live with either. I'm serious. So am I. Caleb crossed his arms. I'm asking you to marry me, Evelyn. But I'm not going to force you. You've got a choice here. She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. What choice? I'm already here. The arrangement's been made. The bride price is probably already spent. I haven't paid it yet. That stopped her cold. What? I told your father I'd send the money after the wedding. That was a lie. I'm not sending him a damn thing. Caleb's jaw tightened. I heard what your family thinks of you. I know they're celebrating getting rid of you. And I'll be damned if I give that man 1 cent for treating his daughter like livestock. Evelyn stared at him. He'll be furious. He can be furious on his own ranch. He's got no power up here. But the agreement was that I'd marry a Grayson daughter. It didn't specify what happens after that. Caleb moved back to the table and sat down. Here's what I'm offering. Stay here for a month. No obligations. Learn about the ranch, learn about me. If at the end of that month you want to leave, I'll give you money and a horse and you can go anywhere you want. Start over somewhere fresh. And if you stay, then we get married. We build this place together. We make it into something neither of us could make alone. It was too good, too easy. There had to be something wrong with it. Why would you do that? Evelyn asked. Why give me a choice when you've already gone through all this trouble? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My mother didn't have a choice. My father was a good man, but he bought her from a family that wanted her gone, just like yours wants you gone. She spent 20 years on this mountain, wishing she was somewhere else. I watched her fade a little more every year. He looked up, old pain in his eyes. I won't do that to someone else. Not even for a woman I've waited 3 years to ask for. The honesty of it hit Evelyn like a fist to the chest. She'd expected threats or manipulation or at least some kind of pressure. Instead, this man was offering her freedom, actual, real freedom, to choose her own future. 1 month, she said slowly. 1 month. And you won't, she stopped, not sure how to ask. I won't touch you, Caleb said bluntly. There's a room upstairs you can have. Door locks from the inside. You'll be safe here, Evelyn. I give you my word. She wanted to believe him. The wanting was so strong it scared her. Okay, she heard herself say. 1 month. The ranch was bigger than Evelyn had realized. Caleb walked her through it as the afternoon sun slanted long across the valley, past the barns where horses stamped and snorted, past the cattle pens where hundreds of head grazed on mountain grass, past the workers' cabins and the storage buildings and the smithy where a man was hammering out horseshoes. Everyone they passed nodded to Caleb with respect that looked genuine, not the kind of deference her father demanded, born of fear and social hierarchy. This was different. These people trusted him. "How many people work here?" Evelyn asked. "About 40 year-round. More during roundup and branding." Caleb paused to let her catch up. The altitude was higher here than she was used to, and her lungs were working harder. "Most of them live on the property. Families, single men, a few widows who cook and mend. You feed all of them and pay them fair wages. Anyone who works hard has a place here." They climbed a rise that overlooked the entire compound. From here, Evelyn could see the full scope of what Caleb had built. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a community, a small town unto itself, functioning and thriving in the middle of nowhere. "Your father built this?" "Started it. I finished it after he died." Caleb's voice went flat. He was a hard man. Good at ranching, bad at everything else. "When I took over, half the hands quit because they couldn't believe I'd actually pay them what they were worth." "How old were you?" 21. Jesus. 21 years old and running an operation this size. Evelyn looked at him with new eyes. "That must have been hard." "Hard doesn't begin to cover it. First winter, I lost 30 head of cattle because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Second year, had a fire that took out 2 barns. Third year," he stopped, jaw tight. "Third year.